Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's Not Your Average Josh back here for another movie review today, and I am reviewing the new movie Insidious: The Red Door, the directorial debut for Patrick Wilson, who's also one of the stars of this movie and this franchise at this point. But before I get into my movie review, I do want to say, as I always say, if you enjoy this video, hit that like button and also leave a comment down below if you have any thoughts on this movie or the Insidious franchise as a whole, or what your favorite horror movie is, whatever you want to leave down in the comment section. And also hit that subscribe button as well if this is your first time watching any of my videos, or if you're a returning viewer as well, any support is always appreciated. Still a smaller channel here, just doing this when I have the time for fun, so I appreciate any support that I do get. You can also follow me on TikTok and add me on Snapchat, where I will post content similar to this, but for the most part, my content will be here on this YouTube channel, Not Your Average Josh. So again, I appreciate all the support, but let's go ahead and get into this review of Insidious: The Red Door. As I mentioned, the directorial debut of Patrick Wilson is this movie, and the writing credits go to Lee Whannell and Scott Teems. And this time, I'm going to read the generic-ass description that is in front of me right now that I got from IMDb for this movie, and probably in a dramatic way. The Lamberts must go deeper into the further than ever before to put their demons to rest once and for all. Because that was about the most basic ass description you could give, pretty much very generic for what this franchise is at this point. Yeah, if you've seen the trailer at all, you pretty much figure that's probably what this movie is going to be about. As I mentioned in my out-of-theater reaction, I really did like the first two Insidious movies. I remember watching them as a young teen growing up, and I really liked the concept of them. They felt like a fresh take a little bit on ghosts or spirits and this whole realm of the further. I thought was really interesting at the time, and there actually was genuinely some pretty scary moments throughout those first two movies. When the third one came out, I kind of really lost my interest for this franchise, I will say. 3 and 4 being basically prequels, I guess, for this whole franchise. Now, this movie coming out, The Red Door, being really the follow-up to Chapter 2, going back to focusing on the Lamberts here in this movie, piqued my interest as much as it could be for this movie. It's still a very mild level of interest in this movie. This isn't one of my favorite horror franchises or anything, but going back to the form of the first two movies definitely is going to make me want to see this more, and so I was interested in Patrick Wilson. I think does a good job here in his directorial debut, and there are some moments I have issues with, but I think overall, just in a general level, I think he did a pretty good job with this. This is pretty much what I was expecting from this movie. A lot of predictable moments with the jump scares that you are used to seeing in these type of movies, and then of course dealing with the further and how that all comes back to haunt literally this family, the Lamberts. It made sense, but it was also very predictable. Some of the issues I had, a lot were very early on. They kind of started with really mainly a lot with the humor in this. It just didn't really work for me at all. I could see where what they were going for with the writing and the directing, but there were just some scenes that felt very clunky and like stagnant. Like there was moments where characters were just kind of staring at each other for like a few seconds too long in a conversation. Like the pacing wasn't quite there, and there's just dramatic story elements going on here, specifically between the dad, Patrick Wilson, Josh Lambert, and of course Ty Simpkins playing Dalton Lambert. There being again the main focus in this movie, Dalton even more so being really the main character of this movie, I would say. But you have these moments early on where they're arguing and fighting. You find out that Josh and of course Rose Byrne returning in this as Renee Lambert, they have gotten a divorce, and so Josh and Dalton's relationship has become strained, the father and son relationship there, and they have a few scenes early on where I could feel where the emotion was coming from, but it just wasn't working for me. I don't know if it was the writing of the dialogue or the directing of it. It just felt, again, the pacing wasn't quite there in some of these moments where they're having these like heated arguments at certain points. And it just it was tough for me to get on board with it. It wasn't necessarily the acting or anything. It was all pretty well done for the most part throughout this movie, but it was just that, along with, again, the humor they tried to use in this, just felt off with what the tone of this movie is, I think. It just didn't quite fit for what I expect in a movie like this, so that's why it just didn't quite work for me. You also have Sinclair Daniel in here as Chris Winslow, a friend that Dalton meets when he's first going to college in this movie. It's 9 years after the events of the second chapter. Her presence is pretty fine for me in this movie as well. I thought, again, with the humor they tried to use with her character, it just a lot of times didn't quite fit for me personally. It didn't work for me for the tone of this movie, and it's not like that the jokes or the humor wasn't funny. I got what they were going for, and it was pretty good writing looking at the individual jokes themselves, but it just didn't work again with the flow of what this movie was. And the world that this movie is just the humor I thought was a little bit too often, maybe, is what it was. But overall, I did like the chemistry she had with Ty Simpkins' character, Dalton. I like the fact that they kept it at a friendship level, didn't try to make some romance out of it. And the way they brought her into figuring out all the events of the further and how that all exists. I thought it felt pretty natural for what this world is. It didn't feel too out there. Like, I understood how it came to be that she figured all this shit out of what's going on here. She'd have a fun energy and a vibe about her. It just, I wish the jokes were a little bit more, maybe more keyed in and focused what this movie is. Maybe, I don't know, for me personally. Again, I mentioned Rose Byrne's in this movie, but she barely honestly makes an appearance in this. And I will say, when she does make an appearance, I already mentioned that Renee and Josh got a divorce off screen before this movie started. They've had a divorce. They're going through shit. And then near the end of this movie, she gets involved, and then something ends up happening near the end. Not going to spoil it, obviously, if you haven't seen it, but where I'm like, okay, so where does this leave us? Like, are we not going to mention the whole divorce thing? That there was just a little bit of a disconnect there. Didn't feel like they were, I don't know, the movie just kind of ended pretty quickly after. I would have liked to see her more in this, and then also to have more of a resolution to what's going on there now. And also the way this movie ends, it's much like a lot of the other Insidious movies where it's a little ambiguous. It's like, oh yeah, the problem solved for this movie, but who knows? I'm sure the further will come back to haunt him again at some point. There's always that open-ended quality to a lot of these horror movies, franchises at this point, and this definitely is no different. The main demon, they bring him back. I don't know the exact name of the demon in here. That's of course, that famous jump scare that everyone was talking about from, I think, the first Insidious film, one of the most famous jump scares in a horror movie. He is back in here. The design looks just as badass as it always has. Always has looked like a creepy design to that character, the red look and everything, looking like a devil and all that. As I mentioned, this is mostly a very predictable story. Like, once you get into how they come in contact with the further again, it makes sense. There's something that happens at the beginning of the movie that really starts out where your characters are, that you understand why the further comes back. It's a haunt them again, even though, again, they really retrace the steps in a lot of ways, go back and show you what's happened. And of course, in chapter 2, they remove their memories, Josh and Dalton, so they wouldn't remember all the whole year of the coma and everything. And so they do not remember all the stuff that happened. And the way they bring that back about to where they do start to reclaim their memories, it made sense, but it was also, again, just very predictable. That's just really what a lot of the story is once they both get caught up inside the further. Really, Dalton being the main one in this movie that they're focusing on, getting trapped inside this. It does feel a lot like Stranger Things in a way with Will and Stranger Things, how he keeps getting trapped inside this. That's kind of how the further feels in a way for Dalton and to a certain extent Josh in this movie. Once it starts happening, there's your plenty of very predictable, scary moments. The jump scares, it got me a couple times. I did jump, but a lot of them, as usual, don't really lead into any necessarily narrative direction. It's just you already know what this place is about, and it's just about just getting scared once you're inside this place and they're feeding on your soul. I always have like the idea again about this further of the lost souls that are just craving life, and that is a very creepy, nice horror cliche to use in this movie that I think works very well. But really, this movie just flew by, honestly. It's not that long of a movie. I think about an hour and 45, hour 46, something like that minutes this movie is. I was never bored or anything. It was just entertaining enough to get me by, and I think I liked the first two movies enough that this returned to that form to where I was entertained enough throughout. But I think I could see how someone would be bored maybe throughout this movie, and I could also see if you're a diehard fan though how you might really enjoy this. So it's a little bit mixed here overall for me, I guess. At the end of it, I did have some good moments with this movie. I just thought there's just some moments once you get into like the second act and into the third act, the dialogue and the pacing works a lot better. I felt like there was like the whole team that was working on certain scenes in the beginning, the people behind the scenes and the people acting in it were just trying a little too hard to manufacture these dramatic moments when they should just let the dialogue and the performances naturally do that. I just kind of feel like they're pushing too hard, and again, they're trying to really show, yeah, there's a struggle going on between the dad and the son here, and we really got to show it. Like, just let it naturally happen. And once it gets into the flow of the story, it fits a lot better. And I was definitely more on board with what was going on in the story. But in the end, it's just a very fine, pretty generic, predictable story that I pretty much expected from this movie. So nothing too surprising here. You also have this professor in this movie too. That seems like every scene with this Professor Armageddon, played by Hiem Abbas, she was always talking about, okay, we gotta close your eyes and go into your deep, darkest past and overcome your memories. Or she just kept going on and on about this over and over again. I was just thinking, like, what kind of professor is this? Just keeps talking about this stuff. Like, it was like an art class he was in, and that's how really they start to unlock Dalton, or Dalton starts to unlock his memories of the further and everything. There's just moments like that with certain characters as well throughout that it's just like, why did they make the decision to make the character that way specifically? There's also a brief appearance by Elise Rainey, played by Lynn Shay, I believe is her name. Of course, been in all four of the films, even though she was gone in the first one. It's still pretty nice to see her in this movie, even though, again, the main ones that she was the most a part of was 3 and 4, and I just kind of fell off this franchise after 2. It's still nice to see her. But anyways, that is my main thoughts. I'm going to give Insidious the Red Door a 5.5 out of 10. Look, definitely not going to be a very memorable film. I think it's probably going to be in there with like a 3 and 4 for me, where it's just kind of pretty forgettable, honestly. Like, the 1 and 2 are still the standouts for me in this franchise that I enjoy the most. And definitely, actually, after watching this, I probably might go back to those two, maybe around October or something, near Halloween this year. But it was fine overall. There definitely have my complaints with it, but it's not a horrible or bad movie. It's just, if you're into this franchise at all, I think you should definitely go see it. You'll probably have a good time with it. But if you're already, maybe you don't like any of the other Insidious films at all, this is definitely not going to be one that pulls you over to the other side. I think this is very typical what you would expect from this. Patrick Wilson did a good job, I think, for the most part, with his directorial debut. But what do you guys think? Have you seen this movie at all? Do you plan on seeing it? Have you seen any of these Insidious movies? What are your thoughts on the franchise? Leave a comment down below, and also hit that like button if you enjoyed this video. And also hit that subscribe button as well if this is your first time watching any of my videos, or if you're a returning viewer. As I always say, any support is very much appreciated. You can also follow me on TikTok and add me on Snapchat, where I will post content similar to this, but for the most part, my content will be here on this YouTube channel, Not Your Average Josh. So again, as always, I appreciate any support I do get. I'll be looking for more videos very soon. I will talk to you guys later.